They did not just push me down the stairs, they pushed me into a new life where they simply do not exist. Gravity has a way of catching up, and so does the truth. Back then, I was worth more dead to them than alive. Now that I have rebuilt myself from the ashes, I am priceless, and they can no longer afford me. My name is Gloria Fairbanks, and the last thing I remember before my life shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces was the smell of my father's expensive scotch mixed with the ozone scent of a Chicago storm. I was 24 years old. I was standing at the top of the grand mahogany staircase in the house that had been in my family for 3 generations. A sprawling Gothic revival mansion that felt less like a home and more like a museum of cold, unfeeling history. It was a Tuesday night in late October. The rain was hammering against the stained glass window behind me. The sound rhythmic and heavy, like dirt hitting a coffin lid. I had one hand resting protectively on my lower abdomen. I was only 14 weeks pregnant, barely showing, but I felt the weight of that life inside me more than I felt the floor beneath my feet. It was all I had left of Michael. When Michael died in that motorcycle accident 3 months prior, I thought my world had ended. I did not know that the world does not end with grief. It ends with betrayal. My parents, Conrad and Sylvia Fairbanks, were standing at the bottom of the landing initially, but they had cornered me on the second floor, blocking the path to my bedroom. They looked like the perfect society couple. My mother was wearing a silk dressing gown that probably cost $2,000. Her blonde hair perfectly coiffed even at 11 at night. My father was still in his suit trousers and a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing the Rolex he refused to sell even though the electricity bill was 3 months overdue. We had been arguing for an hour. The subject was, as always, the trust fund. My grandmother, a woman who possessed more wisdom in her little finger than my parents had in their entire bodies, had bypassed them completely in her will. She knew about the gambling. She knew about the failed venture capital schemes. She knew that Conrad and Sylvia Fairbanks were black holes that swallowed money and emitted nothing but pretension. So, she left everything to me, held in a trust that I could not access fully until I turned 30, or until I produced a legitimate heir. That clause, that specific, archaic clause about the heir, was the reason I was trembling. "You are being selfish, Gloria," my mother said. Her voice was not raised. It never was. Sylvia Fairbanks, weaponized calm. She spoke with a chilling, detached precision. "We are talking about the family legacy. We are talking about saving this house. Do you have any idea what the creditors will do to your father if we do not wire them $500,000 by tomorrow morning? That is not my problem." "Mother," I said, my voice shaking. I gripped the banister. The wood was slick, perhaps from the humidity, perhaps from my own clammy sweat. "I cannot break the trust. You know the lawyers explained this. I can only access the monthly stipend. The principal is locked." "Not anymore," my father interjected. He took a step toward me. His eyes were bloodshot. I could smell the liquor on his breath from 5 feet away. "The baby changed the terms. Gloria, we checked the addendum. If you have a child, the trust considers you a matriarch. The principal unlocks to ensure the security of the heir. You can access the entire $40 million the moment that child is born." I stared at him, horrified. "So that is what this is? You want me to sign over my inheritance rights? You want to use my child as a key to a vault?" "We are a family!" Conrad shouted, his composure cracking. The thunder rumbled outside, shaking the window frames. "I need you to sign the power of attorney. Tonight, we fax it to the firm in the morning. We take a loan against the trust assets. It is simple business." "And what happens when you lose that too?" I asked, backing away until my heels hit the edge of the top step. "What happens when you gamble away my child's future like you gambled away your own?" "No, I will not sign, and I am moving out tomorrow." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. My mother looked at my father. It was a look I had never seen before. It was void of humanity. It was a transactional look, an assessment of assets and liabilities. She is not going to sign. Conrad, Sylvia said. She took a drag from her slim cigarette and exhaled the smoke toward the chandelier. She is going to leave, and she is going to take the trust with her. Gloria, be reasonable, my father pleaded, but his hands were clenching and unclenching at his sides. We are drowning here. I am leaving, I said, turning slightly to navigate around them, clutching my stomach. And if you try to stop me, I will call the police. I am the legal owner of this estate. Remember? Grandmother left the deed to me. That was the wrong thing to say. My mother flicked the ash from her cigarette onto the expensive Persian runner. She looked at my stomach, then up to my father's eyes. Her expression was bored, almost tired. Get rid of it, Conrad, she said. The words hung in the air. Get rid of it. Not her. It, as if I were a stain on the carpet, as if the life inside me was a tumor to be excised. Sylvia, my father whispered. Just get rid of it, she repeated, her voice dropping an octave, turning into steel. If there is no heir, the trust remains frozen, but we stay the guardians until she is 30. We can manage the stipend, but if she leaves with that baby, we lose everything. Do it. I saw the decision form in my father's eyes. It was not instantaneous. I watched the moral struggle happen, and I watched it lose. I watched the greed devour the fatherhood. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he lunged. It happened in slow motion. I remember the sound of his leather shoes squeaking on the wood. I remember the flash of lightning illuminating his face. A face I had kissed goodnight 1,000 times as a child, now twisted into a grimace of desperate violence. He did not just bump into me. He planted his palms squarely on my shoulders. He shoved me, hard. No! I screamed. But the sound was swallowed by the house. The sensation of gravity disappearing is the most terrifying feeling in the world. For a split second, I was flying backward. My hands flailed, grasping at empty air. I tried to twist my body. I tried to turn so that I would land on my back, on my side, anywhere but my stomach. Protect the baby. Protect the baby. The mantra screamed in my mind. But physics is cruel and unyielding. My lower back hit the edge of the first step with a sickening crack. The pain was white-hot, electric, shooting up my spine and exploding behind my eyes. But I did not stop there. I tumbled. The world became a blur of spinning lights and hard, dark wood. I hit the banister with my shoulder. I heard my collarbone snap. It sounded like a dry branch stepping under a heavy boot. I rolled. I struck the sharp edge of the stairs with my hip, then my head. The sound of my skull hitting the wood was a dull thud, distinct from the crack of bones. Thump, thump, thump. It felt endless. I was a rag doll tossed by a hurricane. Every impact forced the air from my lungs. I could not scream. I could not breathe. I was just falling, down into the dark throat of the house that hated me. I landed at the bottom of the grand staircase on the marble foyer floor. I landed on my stomach. The impact knocked the consciousness out of me for a second. A brief flicker of black, and then the pain rushed back in like a tidal wave. It was not just pain, it was a total system failure. My leg was twisted at an impossible angle beneath me. My head was throbbing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. But the worst pain was the cramping, tearing sensation deep inside my abdomen. It felt as if something essential was being ripped away from the moorings of my soul. I tried to move. I tried to lift my head. I could only manage a low, guttural moan. My vision was swimming in red and black pools. I could taste copper in my mouth. Blood. I was bleeding. I lay there, cheek pressed against the cold marble, unable to draw a full breath. From the top of the stairs, 20 feet above me, I heard footsteps. They were not running down to help. They were standing there. Is she dead? That was my father. His voice was trembling, but not with grief, with fear of consequences. Quiet, my mother hissed. I heard the rustle of silk. They were walking down the stairs now, slowly, deliberately. They were coming to inspect their work. I wanted to scream, "Help me," but my throat was full of blood. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning unconsciousness. Instinct told me that if they knew I was awake, if they knew I had seen the push, they would finish the job right here on the foyer floor. They stopped a few feet away from my broken body. "Look at the leg," my father whispered. "She is badly hurt. Sylvia, there is a lot of blood. God, look at the blood." "Stop whining," my mother said. I heard the click of her lighter. She was lighting another cigarette, standing over her broken daughter. She was smoking. "Check her pulse." I felt cold fingers press against my neck, my father's hand. It was shaking violently. "She is alive," he said. "The pulse is weak, but it is there. We have to call 911. Conrad needs to call 911 right now." "No," Sylvia said. The word hung there, suspended in the cold air. "Sylvia, she could die," Conrad said. "If she lives, she talks," Sylvia replied. Her voice was as smooth as velvet and as sharp as a razor blade. "And if she talks, we go to prison, and we lose the money. So what do we do?" "We wait," Sylvia said. "Look at the blood spreading on the floor. Conrad, it is coming from her legs. She is losing the baby. That is a guarantee. If we call the ambulance now, they might save the pregnancy. Technology is good these days. But if we wait?" She paused. I could hear her exhale smoke. "If we wait 20 minutes, nature takes its course. The problem solves itself." She lost her footing. She slipped. It was a tragic accident on a rainy night. "You were in the study. I was in the bath. We heard a noise. We came running, but we were too late to save the air." 20 minutes? Conrad asked. "She might bleed out." "Then she bleeds out," Sylvia said, with the casual indifference of someone deciding what to order for dinner. "Either way, the trust fund stays with the guardians. If she survives, she will be traumatized. We can declare her mentally unfit. We can say she threw herself down the stairs in a fit of grief over Michael. Who will they believe? The grieving, unstable girl, or her upstanding parents?" I lay there, and a single tear leaked from my eye, mixing with the blood on the floor. The physical pain was blinding. My femur was shattered. My body was screaming. But the agony in my heart was what threatened to kill me. My mother and father were standing 5 feet away, watching me bleed, watching the life I was nurturing slip away onto the cold stone, and they were checking their watches. They were counting down the minutes until my child was dead enough to cash in. I realized then that I did not have parents. I had predators. The darkness began to encroach on the edges of my vision. It was a mercy. I could feel the cold creeping up my fingers and toes. The sounds of the storm outside grew muffled, as if I were underwater. 15 more minutes, I heard my mother say softly. "Pour yourself a drink. Conrad, you look pale. We need to sound convincing when the paramedics arrive." I tried to etch this moment into my soul. I tried to burn their voices into the neurons of my brain. Even as those neurons were starving for oxygen, "Get rid of it. Pour yourself a drink. 15 more minutes," I promised myself. In that final second before the blackness took me completely, that I would not die. I would not give them the satisfaction of a funeral. I would survive this. And one day, I would make them wish they had checked my pulse a second time to make sure I was truly gone. I let go of the consciousness I was fighting to hold. I let the dark water take me. But as I sank, I held on to one single, burning ember of hate. It was the only warmth I had left. Then, there was nothing. The return to consciousness was not a sudden jolt, but a slow, agonizing crawl through layers of thick, gray fog. The first thing that registered was the smell. It was not the metallic scent of blood or the rich, damp odor of the storm anymore. It was sharp, chemical, and aggressively clean. It was the smell of iodine and floor wax. It was the smell of a place where people came to be fixed or to die. I opened my eyes, but the harsh fluorescent lights forced them shut immediately. A headache pulsed behind my temples, a rhythmic thudding that matched the steady, electronic beeping of a machine somewhere to my left. I tried to move my right hand, but it felt heavy, weighed down by a plastic clip on my finger and the tape of an intravenous line on the back of my hand. I tried to move my legs. That was when the scream caught in my throat. My left leg was immovable, encased in something heavy and rigid. A dull, grinding ache radiated from my thigh bone. A deep, structural pain that felt less like an injury and more like a permanent alteration of my geography. But it was the sensation in my abdomen that made the room spin, even though I was lying perfectly flat. It felt empty. There is a specific weight to pregnancy, even at 14 weeks. There is a sense of fullness, a subtle pressure of life taking up space, demanding resources. That pressure was gone. In its place was a hollow, cramping void, and the distinct, terrifying feeling of bandages wrapped tight around my midsection. I forced my eyes open again, fighting the glare. I was in a private room. The walls were a tasteful, muted beige, not the stark white of a public ward. There were fresh flowers on the windowsill. Lilies. My mother loved lilies. The sight of them made bile rise in my throat. The door opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. A man walked in. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair thinned by time and a face etched with the kind of deep lines that come from decades of delivering bad news. He wore a white coat with the name St. Jude's Private Hospital embroidered on the pocket, and below it, Dr. Elias Thorne. He stopped when he saw I was awake. His expression did not shift into the practiced, cheerful mask that most doctors wear. He looked grave. He looked tired. "Miss Fairbanks," he said softly. His voice was gravelly but gentle. "Do not try to move. You have been under heavy sedation for nearly 2 days." "My baby," I rasped. My voice sounded like dry leaves scraping over concrete. "Doctor?" Thorne walked to the side of the bed and checked the readout on the monitor. He did not look at me immediately. He took a moment, perhaps giving me a second of ignorance before the hammer fell. Then he pulled the rolling stool closer and sat down, bringing himself to my eye level. "I am sorry, Gloria," he said. He used my first name. That was a breach of protocol, but it felt like a lifeline. The trauma from the fall caused a placental abruption. The blood loss was significant. We did everything we could, but there was no heartbeat when you arrived. I closed my eyes. Tears did not come. I was too dehydrated, too hollowed out for tears. I just felt a piece of my soul detach and drift away. The last link to Michael was gone. They had killed him. Conrad and Sylvia had not just pushed me, they had erased the only family I had left. "And my leg?" I asked, staring at the ceiling tiles. "A comminuted fracture of the femur," Thorne recited, shifting into clinical mode to mask the emotional weight in the room. "The bone was shattered in 3 places. We had to insert a titanium rod and screws to reconstruct the thigh. You will walk again, but it will take months of rehabilitation. You will likely have a limp for the rest of your life." A limp, a dead child, a shattered life. "Who brought me in?" I asked. "Your parents," Thorne said. He paused, and I sensed a hesitation in him. "They told the admissions staff that you slipped on the stairs. They said you were distraught over the anniversary of your partner's death and that you had been drinking." "I was not drinking," I whispered. "I was pregnant. I have not touched alcohol in 4 months." "I know," Thorne said quietly. "Your toxicology screen was clean. There was no alcohol in your system, only prenatal vitamins." He looked at me then, really looked at me. His eyes were a piercing gray, intelligent and assessing. He was waiting for me to say it. He was waiting for me to scream that it was attempted murder, but fear clamped a hand over my mouth. If I accused them now, while I was bedridden and helpless, what would they do? They were powerful. They had money, or at least the appearance of it. I was the hysterical daughter who had just lost a baby. "Rest now," Thorne said. Standing up, "We can discuss the details later. You need to sleep." He adjusted the drip, and I felt a wave of artificial drowsiness wash over me. I drifted, but I did not go all the way under. I floated in the gray space between waking and sleeping, a place where sounds were magnified. I do not know how much time passed. The light in the room had changed from the bright white of midday to the long orange shadows of late afternoon. I heard voices. They were coming from the hallway, just outside my door. The door had been left slightly ajar, perhaps by a nurse checking my vitals. "We need the paperwork expedited. Arthur," that was my mother's voice. It was unmistakable. It was the same cool, detached tone she had used when she told my father to get rid of the baby. "I understand the urgency, Mrs. Fairbanks," a male voice replied. I recognized it as their family lawyer, a man who had helped my father cover up a drunk driving incident 3 years ago. But a conservatorship is a serious legal step. We need 2 physicians to certify that she is a danger to herself or lacks the capacity to manage her own affairs. She just threw herself down a flight of stairs. My father's voice cut in. He sounded impatient, jittery. She killed her own child. Arthur. She is clearly unstable. We have the history of depression after her boyfriend died. We have the tragic accident. It fits the narrative. We need control of the trust to pay for her medical care. It is for her own good. "Doctor, Thorne is being difficult," my mother said. "He is refusing to sign the competency evaluation. He says she is lucid. We might need to transfer her to a different facility, somewhere more accommodating. Doctor, Evans at the Whispering Pines Sanatorium owes us a favor." "Get the transfer order ready," the lawyer said. "If you can move her by tomorrow morning, we can file the emergency motion for temporary guardianship by noon, once she is in a psychiatric hold. She cannot contest the trust access." "Good," my mother said. "She is worth nothing to us if she is awake and talking. Get it done." The voices faded as they walked down the corridor. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would trigger the alarms. They were not just content with killing my baby. They were going to lock me away. Whispering Pines was a warehouse for the inconvenient relatives of the elite. If I went there, I would be medicated into oblivion. I would never see the sun again. They would drain the $40 million while I drooled in a padded room. I was going to die. If I stayed in this bed one more night, I was a dead woman. The door hissed open again. I flinched, expecting my parents. It was Dr. Thorne. He looked more exhausted than before. He was holding a clipboard, his knuckles white as he gripped the plastic edge. "Dr. Thorne," I whispered. The fear in my voice was raw, unfiltered. He crossed the room quickly and checked the door, pushing it until it clicked shut. He turned to me, his face grim. "You heard them," he stated. It was not a question. "They are going to send me to Whispering Pines," I said, tears finally spilling over. "They are going to declare me insane. Please, you cannot let them take me. I did not fall. They pushed me. They pushed me because I would not sign over the trust fund." "Doctor." Thorne let out a long, heavy sigh. He pulled the chair close again, leaning in so his voice would not carry. "I know," he said. I stared at him. "You know? I have been an emergency trauma surgeon for 40 years. Gloria," he said. "I know the difference between the bruising patterns of a tumble and the impact trauma of a shove. You have hand-shaped contusions on your scapula. You fell forward and down, but the initial force came from behind, and your toxicology report contradicts their story entirely." "Then help me," I begged. I reached out and grabbed his hand. His skin was cool and dry. "Call the police." "If I call the police, your parents will have their lawyer here in 10 minutes, Thorne said, his voice low and urgent. "They will claim the bruising was from your father trying to catch you. They will claim the lab made a mistake. They have connections. Gloria. And right now, you are a 24-year-old woman with a history of grief who just lost a child. The system is not designed to protect you. It is designed to protect people like them." He looked toward the door, then back at me. A flash of anger crossed his eyes, a righteous, burning anger that surprised me. "When I told them you lost the baby," Thorne said, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage, "they did not ask if you were in pain. They did not cry. Your mother asked how long the recovery would be before you could sign documents. Your father asked if the autopsy of the fetus was mandatory. They are not parents. They are vultures. I need to leave, I said. I have money, not the trust, but I have savings. I can pay you. I do not want your money, Thorn snapped, then softened. I had a daughter. She would have been your age. She died because someone with power decided she was disposable. I could not save her, but I can save you. How? I asked. I cannot walk. We do not have much time, Thorn said, checking his watch. The shift change is at 7 in the evening. That is in 20 minutes. The night staff is skeletal. I have a property. A farmhouse in upstate New York. About 6 hours from here. It is off the grid. My wife, Martha, is there. She was a nurse before she retired. She can care for your injuries. But how do I get out of the hospital? I asked. My parents are watching the exits. Gloria Fairbanks cannot leave this hospital, Thorn said, his eyes locking onto mine. Gloria Fairbanks is going to have a tragic medical complication tonight. My breath caught in my throat. What do you mean? I am going to enter a transfer order into the system, Thorn explained rapidly. It will state that you are being moved to a specialized neurosurgery unit at Columbia Presbyterian. Due to a sudden brain hemorrhage, that is the cover story for your parents. The ambulance that picks you up will be private transport, driven by my nephew. He is trustworthy. And then? The records will show that Gloria Fairbanks died of cardiac arrest 10 miles outside the city limits during transport. Thorn said, We will switch the manifest. There is a Jane Doe in the morgue downstairs, a homeless woman who passed away this morning. No family, no ID. I will handle the paperwork. It is a felony, but it is the only way. You would do that for me? I asked, stunned. You could lose your license. You could go to jail. I am retiring next month, Thorn said with a bitter smile. Let them come for me. By the time they figure it out, you will be a ghost, and they will be busy fighting over a trust fund they can never touch because the beneficiary is dead. But if I am dead, they get the money, I realized. No, Thorn corrected. If you are dead without an heir. The trust dissolves into a charitable foundation managed by the bank. That was your grandmother's failsafe. They get nothing. They will be furious. But they will stop hunting you, because you do not hunt ghosts. The plan was terrifying. It was insane. It required me to give up my name, my identity, and my entire life. But as I thought about the alternative, the padded room at Whispering Pines, the slow erasure of my mind while my parents drank champagne on my dime, the choice became clear. Do it, I whispered. Thorn nodded once. He stood up and went to the cabinet, pulling out a syringe. This is a mild sedative mixed with a pain blocker, he said. It will help you endure the move. When you wake up, you will be with Martha. You will be safe. But Gloria, you can never contact anyone from your old life. Not a friend, not a distant cousin. Tonight, Gloria Fairbanks dies. I looked at the syringe. I looked at the man who was risking everything for a stranger simply because he recognized the face of evil. Gloria Fairbanks died on the stairs, I said, my voice hardening. I am just the one who survived. Thorn injected the fluid into my IV line. I will come for you in 30 minutes. Be ready. He turned off the lights, plunging the room back into semi-darkness. I lay there, listening to the hum of the hospital, feeling the drug begin to warm my veins. I looked at my hands. They were pale, trembling. In 30 minutes, I would cease to exist. I closed my eyes and visualized my parents' faces. I memorized them. I stored them in the deepest, coldest part of my mind, right next to the grief for my child. They thought they had won. They thought they were clearing the board, but they did not know the game had changed. I was not leaving the board. I was just moving into the shadows. And when I came back, I would not be their daughter. I would be their reckoning. The darkness took me again, but this time I was not falling. I was waiting. The first winter in Vermont was brutal, a stark contrast to the wet, gray gloom of Chicago. Here, the cold was sharp and purifying. It froze the breath in your lungs and turned the world into a landscape of white silence. I spent those first 6 months inside the guest cottage of Elias and Martha Thorne's farmhouse, watching the snow pile up against the window pane, feeling like a ghost haunting a stranger's life. My name was no longer Gloria Fairbanks. That girl died on a stretcher in a fake ambulance ride. I needed a new skin to wear, something that fit the person I was becoming. I chose the name Gloria Vance. I found it in a dusty paperback thriller on Martha's bookshelf. A character who was a detective, sharp-witted and fearless. I did not know then that the name would eventually bind me to the love of my life. At the time, it was just a shield, a mask. Martha Thorne was the antithesis of my mother. Sylvia was silk and ice. Martha was wool and warm bread. She was a retired trauma nurse with hands that were rough from gardening but incredibly gentle when she changed the dressings on my leg. The metal rod in my femur made every step a negotiation with agony. My muscles had atrophied, and my balance was gone. "You are dragging the foot, Gloria," Martha would say, standing at the end of the hallway with her arms crossed. "Lift it. If you drag it, you are admitting you are hurt. If you lift it, you are fighting back." I hated her in those moments, and I loved her for it. She did not pity me. Pity would have destroyed me. Instead, she demanded I rebuild. We spent hours in that hallway. 1 step, 2 steps, the sweat would pour down my back, and the phantom sensation of my lost child would ache in my womb. But I kept walking. I walked until I could make it to the kitchen without the cane. I walked until the limp was not a stumble, but a subtle, rhythmic hitch in my stride. A reminder, not a weakness. While my body knit itself back together, my mind needed a target. I could not sit idle. Idleness was where the nightmares lived. In the nightmares, I was always falling. In the nightmares, I could hear the wet thud of my body hitting the marble. To silence them, I threw myself into the digital world. I enrolled in an online degree program for business administration and computer science under my new identity. I devoured information. I realized that my parents' failure was not just moral, it was mathematical. They did not understand how money moved. They only knew how to spend it. I vowed to master the invisible currents of capital. I studied market trends, algorithmic trading, and corporate structuring. I worked with a feverish intensity, finishing a 4-year curriculum in 2 years. During the day, I was Gloria Vance, the diligent student. But at night, I was a spy. I tracked them. It was surprisingly easy. Conrad and Sylvia Fairbanks loved the spotlight, and they were too arrogant to realize that the internet never forgets. I set up alerts for their names. I watched from 1,000 miles away as they played the role of grieving parents. They sold the mansion 6 months after my death. The real estate listing described it as a historic gem, failing to mention the staircase where their daughter had bled out. They sold it for $4 million. Then came the life insurance payout. Since the body was cremated, due to the nature of the accident, another lie Elias had masterfully buried in the paperwork, they claimed the policy without issue. $2 million. They had $6 million in cash. They could have paid off their debts. They could have started over. But I watched, pixel by pixel. As they destroyed themselves, I saw photos of them at galas in the Hamptons. I saw my mother wearing a diamond necklace that I knew cost $50,000. I saw my father investing in a luxury yacht club scheme that went bankrupt 3 months later. They were bleeding money, trying to fill the hole in their souls with champagne and caviar. They were not grieving, they were celebrating. Every smile I saw on their faces in those socialite magazines hardened my heart a little more. They had traded my life and my child's life for a 5-year party. "Let them spend it," Elias told me one evening as we sat by the fire. He had aged since the night at St. Jude's, the burden of our secret etching deeper lines into his face. "The money will run out. Gloria, evil always consumes itself." "I do not just want them to run out of money," I replied, staring into the flames. "I want them to know why they are poor when the end comes." By the time I turned 26, I was ready to leave the sanctuary. I had graduated with top honors, completely remote, and I had secured an entry-level analyst position at a tech startup in New York City called Vanguard Systems. Moving to New York was terrifying. It was the city where people went to be seen, and I was trying to remain invisible. I dyed my hair from its natural honey blonde to a deep, severe brunette. I wore glasses I did not need. I dressed in sharp, tailored suits that hid the slight curvature of my left thigh. Vanguard Systems was chaos. It was a company with brilliant engineers but zero organizational structure. It was the perfect place for me. I did not just do my job. I organized their chaos. I automated their workflows. I predicted market shifts before the CEO even read the morning news. I worked 18 hours a day because I had no one to go home to. That was how I met Julian. Julian Vance was the founder of Vanguard. He was 32, a prodigy in cloud computing, with eyes that were too kind for the Shark Tank of New York business. We met in the elevator at 2 a.m. We were the only two people left in the building. He glanced at my ID badge, then did a double take. "Vance?" he asked, rubbing his tired eyes. "Is that a joke? Are you a distant cousin trying to launch a hostile takeover?" I froze. I had chosen the name from a book. I had completely forgotten that the CEO's last name was the same. It was a cosmic joke. "No relation," I said, clutching my laptop bag. "Just a coincidence." "A fortunate one," he smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. "I saw your report on the logistical bottlenecks in the server farm. You saved us $300,000 this quarter. I wanted to thank you." "I was just doing my job," I said. "Most people do their job," Julian said, stepping closer. "You are waging a war. I can see it in your work. You attack problems like they personally offended you." He was more perceptive than I had anticipated. That elevator ride turned into a coffee, which turned into a dinner meeting, which turned into a partnership. I rose through the ranks at meteoric speed, not because of nepotism, but because I was undeniable. Within 2 years, I was the chief operating officer. I was the sword to Julian's shield. I cut costs. I fired incompetent managers, and I negotiated deals that made Vanguard a unicorn company. But as my professional life soared, my personal walls began to crumble. Julian was persistent. He did not just admire my mind. He seemed fascinated by the shadows I tried so hard to hide. He noticed the limp when it rained. He noticed that I never spoke of family. He noticed that I flinched when people raised their voices. We fell in love not with flowers and chocolates, but with late-night strategies and shared silence. He was the first man since Michael who made me feel safe. But safety is a trap for a liar. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, 3 years after I had arrived in New York. We were in his penthouse, watching the city lights blur through the downpour. The sound of the rain against the glass triggered something in me, a flashback to the mansion, the stairs, the cold. I started shaking. I could not stop. Julian found me curled up on the rug, gasping for air. He held me, rocking me back and forth, asking what was wrong. "I cannot do this," I sobbed. "I cannot be Gloria Vance. She does not exist." "What are you talking about?" he asked gently, brushing the hair from my face. And then, I broke the one rule Elias had given me. I told him. I told him about the mansion in Chicago. I told him about the trust fund. I told him about the baby I never got to hold. I told him about the push, the stairs, and the hospital. I stripped myself bare, expecting him to run. I expected him to be horrified by the baggage, by the fraud, by the fact that I was technically a dead woman walking. When I finished, the silence in the room was deafening. I dared to look up at him. Julian was not looking at me with fear. He was crying. Tears were streaming down his face, but his jaw was set in a line of absolute, terrifying fury. "They did that to you?" he whispered. His voice was dangerous. "Your own parents?" "Yes," I said. "And they are still out there?" "Yes." Julian stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the city that we now practically owned. When he turned back to me, the kindness in his eyes had hardened into resolve. He did not look like the gentle tech CEO anymore. He looked like a warlord readying for a siege. "You are not Gloria Fairbanks anymore," he said, coming back to kneel beside me. "And you are not just Gloria Vance, the character from a book. You are the woman I'm going to marry, and we are going to burn them to the ground." He took my hand, kissing the knuckles white with tension. "You wanted to build an empire to protect yourself," Julian said. "Well, you have one now, and you have an army. Let's find out how much your parents really like playing games." That was the moment the game changed. I was no longer a lone survivor hiding in the dark. I had a partner, I had resources, and for the first time in 5 years, I did not feel like the victim. I felt like the hunter. I checked the news on my phone later that night while Julian slept beside me. There was a small article in the society pages. Conrad and Sylvia Fairbanks rumored to be downsizing to a condo in Manhattan. They were coming to my city. They were running out of money. Just as Elias had predicted. They were coming to hunt for a new victim, a new hustle. I smiled in the darkness. "Come to New York, Mother. Come to New York, Father. I have the welcome mat ready, and it leads right off a cliff. 5 years is a lifetime in the tech world. In 5 years, a startup can become a monopoly, a trend can become a lifestyle, and a frightened girl can become a titan." I was 29 years old, and when I walked into the boardroom of Vanguard Systems, the air changed, the chatter stopped, the 50-something executives in Italian suits straightened their ties. They did not fear me because I was cruel. They feared me because I was precise. As the chief operating officer, I had turned Vanguard from a messy cloud computing firm into a global infrastructure giant valued at $12 billion. I lived in a world of glass and steel, high above the streets of Manhattan. The limp was still there, a constant companion, but I had learned to wear it like a piece of armor. I wore 4-inch stilettos that cost more than my first car, forcing my body to adapt, forcing the pain to submit to my will. But the most significant change wasn't on the stock market ticker. It was on my left hand. Julian proposed on a Tuesday, in the middle of a chaotic product launch preparation. There was no hot air balloon, no string quartet. He simply walked into my office, locked the door, swept the blueprints for the new data center off my desk, and sat on the edge of it. "I cannot do this anymore," he said, looking at me with that intensity that still made my breath hitch. "The launch?" I asked, not looking up from my tablet. "It is just a server rollout, Julian. We have done 3 this year." "No, this," he said, gesturing between us. "I cannot wake up one more day without you legally being my partner in everything. Not just the business, everything." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a diamond that looked like a shard of ice, clean and sharp. An emerald cut, flawless, set in platinum. It was not ostentatious. It was unbreakable. "Gloria," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you are the strongest person I've ever met. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. Let me build the rest of your life with you." I said yes. I said yes, not just because I loved him, which I did with a ferocity that scared me, but because he knew the monster under my bed and he handed me a flashlight instead of telling me it wasn't real. The engagement announcement hit the wire services the next morning. Tech mogul Julian Vance to marry COO Gloria Vance. The irony of the shared last name was the talk of the town. The press called it destiny. I called it camouflage. The wedding planning began immediately. It was not going to be a simple affair. Julian insisted. "You hid for 5 years," he told me one night as we looked at venue options. "This is your coming out party. We are going to make so much noise that the past won't be able to hear itself." We booked the Obsidian Plaza, the most exclusive venue in New York. The ballroom had walls of black marble and a ceiling of crushed crystal that looked like the night sky. It was dark, dramatic, and fiercely modern. It was perfect, but every wedding has a ghost at the banquet table. For me, it was the guest list. We were sitting in our living room 3 months before the date, surrounded by RSVP cards. Julian was holding a glass of scotch, staring at the empty slots for bride's family. "We can invite Elias and Martha," he said. "They are your family." "They are coming," I said. "Elias is walking me down the aisle." "But what about the others?" Julian asked. He didn't say their names. He rarely did. He treated Conrad and Sylvia like pathogens, something to be sanitized, not discussed. "I have been tracking them," I said, picking up my iPad. "Do you want to see?" I pulled up the dossier I had compiled over the last few weeks. It was a pathetic, predictable downward spiral. The $6 million was long gone. The condo in Manhattan was rented, not owned. My father was currently facing 2 lawsuits for fraud related to a non-existent cryptocurrency venture. My mother was reportedly pawning her jewelry to pay for her Botox and country club memberships. They were desperate. They were circling the drain of high society, trying to cling to the rim with their fingernails. "They are looking for a mark," I explained, showing Julian a photo of my father cornering an elderly oil tycoon at a charity gala. "They are hunting for someone to bail them out, someone rich, someone gullible." "Let them rot," Julian said, his lip curling in disgust. "Why are we talking about them?" "Because they found me," I said. I slid a copy of Forbes magazine across the coffee table. It was the issue featuring our engagement photo. In the picture, I was looking away from the camera, my profile clear, the scar on my neck hidden by a diamond choker. But my eyes were unmistakable. "I got a notification from the security team at the office," I said calmly. 2 days ago, a woman called the front desk. She claimed to be an old family friend. She asked if Gloria Vance was originally from Chicago. She asked about a birthmark on my shoulder. Julian went rigid. "Did they patch her through?" "No, but she knows. Sylvia knows." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that felt like my fortress. "They see the ring. They see the valuation of the company. They don't see a daughter who survived. They see a winning lottery ticket that they threw in the trash." "I will double the security," Julian said. Standing up, "I will get a restraining order. They won't get within 500 feet of the obsidian." "No," I said, turning to face him. "No? If we block them, they will go to the press," I said. "They will sell a sob story. The cruel billionaire daughter who abandoned her destitute parents. They will spin it. They will ruin the wedding from the outside." "So what do we do?" "We invite them," I said. Julian stared at me as if I had spoken in tongues. "You want to invite the people who tried to kill you to our wedding?" "I don't just want them to attend. Julian," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "I want them to be the guests of honor." I walked over to the desk where the heavy, cream-colored invitations were stacked. I picked up a fountain pen. "Think about it," I said, my voice steady. "They are desperate for money. They see this wedding as their way back in. If I invite them, they will think I have forgiven them, or better yet, they will think I have amnesia. They will think I'm stupid." "And when they arrive?" Julian asked. "Wary. When they arrive, they will walk into a trap," I said. "I am not going to arrest them in a dark alley. I am going to expose them in front of the 500 most powerful people in New York. I am going to let them think they have won, right until the moment the spotlight hits them." I wrote the names on the envelope. The ink flowed black and permanent. Mr. and Mrs. Conrad Fairbanks. I slipped the invitation inside. It was heavy, expensive cardstock. It smelled like money. It was the perfect bait for sharks. "This is dangerous, Gloria," Julian warned. "These people have no bottom." "Neither do I," I replied. "Not anymore." I looked at the invitation one last time before sealing it. I imagined the look on my mother's face when she opened it, the greed, the relief, the triumphant smirk. She would think she had gotten away with it. She would think that the universe had bent to her will once again. "Send it," I said, handing the envelope to Julian. He looked at me, searching for any sign of hesitation. He found none. He took the envelope. "Get rid of it?" he asked. quoting the line that haunted my nightmares. "No," I corrected him. "Bring it home." The next few weeks were a blur of preparation, but beneath the surface of floral arrangements and menu tastings, a different kind of plan was being laid. I hired a private investigator to dig up every scrap of dirt on my parents from the last 5 years. I retrieved the old cloud data from the Chicago mansion, the digital footprint they didn't know existed. I prepared a presentation that would be far more memorable than any slideshow of childhood photos. I felt a strange sense of calm for 5 years. I had been running away from that night on the stairs. I had been limping away from the pain. Now, I was turning around. I was standing my ground. The RSVP came back 3 days later. It was checked accepts with pleasure. My mother had added a note in her sprawling, pretentious handwriting. "So happy to be reunited. Family is everything." I laughed when I read it. It was a dry, humorless sound. Family is everything. Yes, Mother, it is. And you are about to learn exactly what that means. The trap was set. The stage was built. All the actors had to do now was learn their lines and walk to their deaths, or rather, their social execution. I looked at my reflection in the mirror of my office. The woman staring back wasn't the frightened girl in the rain anymore. She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. She was a survivor. She was the executioner. "See you soon, Mom and Dad," I whispered to the glass. "Don't be late." The air in my office at Vanguard Systems was usually kept at a precise 68 degrees, but that afternoon, it felt glacial. I was standing behind my desk, a slab of imported volcanic rock that cost more than my parents' current net worth, looking out at the skyline. My assistant, Sarah, had buzzed me 2 minutes ago. Her voice had been trembling. "Ms. Vance," she had said, "there are 2 people here to see you. They claim to be your parents. They do not have an appointment, but they are insisting." "Send them in," I had replied, my voice steady, betraying nothing. I turned just as the glass doors opened. Conrad and Sylvia Fairbanks walked in. Seeing them in the flesh after 5 years was like looking at a distorted reflection in a funhouse mirror. They were them, but diminished. The edges were frayed. My father's suit was a designer brand, but it was at least 3 seasons old, and the fabric shone slightly at the elbows, a sign of too much dry cleaning and too much wear. His face was puffy, the capillaries around his nose broken into a spider web of red, the hallmark of expensive whiskey consumed in cheap quantities. My mother was worse. She was still beautiful in that brittle porcelain way, but the cracks were visible. Her facelift was pulled too tight, giving her a perpetual look of surprised disdain. She wore a Chanel suit that I remembered from my childhood, but the buttons had been replaced, likely after being lost. She clutched her handbag like a weapon. They stopped in the middle of the room, taking in the panoramic view of Manhattan, the sleek minimalist furniture, and finally, me. "Gloria," my mother breathed. She brought a hand to her chest, a theatrical gesture straight out of a soap opera. "Oh, my God, it is really you." She rushed forward, arms open, aiming for an embrace. I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply stood there, my hands clasped behind my back, radiating a coldness so absolute it stopped her in her tracks 3 feet from my desk. "Mother, Father," I said. My tone was polite, distant, the way one greets a business associate they intend to fire. "Please, sit." I gestured to the 2 low-slung leather chairs opposite my desk. Sylvia faltered, her smile twitching. She looked at Conrad, then smoothed her skirt and sat down. Conrad followed, looking around the office with greedy eyes, calculating the cost of the furniture, the view, the power. "We thought you were dead," Conrad said, his voice thick with feigned emotion. He leaned forward, trying to summon tears. "For 5 years. Gloria, 5 years of hell. We mourned you. We buried an empty casket." "Did you?" I asked. I walked around my desk and sat down, crossing my legs. "That must have been difficult. especially with the insurance paperwork. Conrad froze for a microsecond, then recovered. The money meant nothing. We would have given every cent to have you back. When we saw the magazine, Sylvia nearly fainted. We flew here immediately. Why? Why did you run away? Why did you let us suffer? I needed space, I said, keeping my answers vague. I wanted them to fill the silence. I wanted them to construct their own lie. Space? Sylvia let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, then quickly softened it into a sob. Darling, you were confused. The accident, the fall must have affected your memory. We were frantic at the hospital. When the doctors told us you had been transferred and then died, we were broken. The fall, I repeated. Tell me about the fall. My memory is indeed hazy. I watched them exchange a glance. It was the same conspiratorial look they had shared on the stairs, the look of predators deciding how to flank their prey. It was the storm, my father said quickly. You were standing at the top of the stairs. You were upset about Michael. You were dizzy. I tried to catch you. I reached out. Gloria, I swear on my life, I reached out to save you. But my foot slipped on the rug. I bumped into you. It was a terrible, tragic accident. And then you disappeared, Sylvia added. Leaning in. We searched for you. We hired investigators, but you were gone. We thought the hospital had made a mistake with the records. We never stopped hoping. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't felt his hands on my shoulders, if I hadn't heard her say, "Get rid of it," I might have believed them. They had rehearsed this. They had polished this lie until it gleamed. Well, I said, leaning back in my chair, I am here now. And look at you, Conrad said, gesturing to the room. You have done remarkably well. A COO, a billionaire fiancé. We are so proud. Gloria, despite everything, the Fairbanks blood always rises to the top. We want to be part of your life again, Sylvia said, her eyes glistening. We want to be a family, especially with the wedding coming up. A girl needs her mother on her wedding day. Here it comes. I thought, the hook? I sent you an invitation, I noted. We received it, Sylvia said. It was a sign of forgiveness. She paused, licking her lips nervously. But there is a small problem. Darling, you see, the last few years have been hard on us, emotionally, of course, but also financially. The grief made it hard for your father to work. We made some bad investments trying to distract ourselves. We are in a bit of a tight spot, Conrad admitted, trying to look humble but only looking pathetic. The creditors are aggressive. It would be embarrassing if the parents of the bride were harassed by debt collectors during the ceremony. It would reflect poorly on you, on Julian. How much? I asked. 2 million? Conrad said. Just to clear the immediate debts, to get us back on our feet, so we can stand beside you at the altar with dignity. $2 million, the exact amount of the life insurance policy they had blown. The symmetry was disgusting. I looked at them. I let the silence stretch until I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I tapped my finger on the desk. A slow, rhythmic beat. I see, I said. You want me to pay off your debts so we can be a happy family again. It is not a payment, Sylvia corrected quickly. It is support. It is what families do. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked down at the cars crawling like ants 40 stories below. I will consider it, I said, not turning around. Really? Conrad's voice jumped up an octave. On one condition, I said, turning back to face them. You attend the wedding. You sit where I tell you to sit. You smile. You play the role of the loving parents perfectly. If you cause a scene, if you embarrass me, you get nothing. But if the wedding goes smoothly, we can discuss the transfer of funds the next morning. Of course, Sylvia cried, standing up and clapping her hands. Oh, Gloria, thank you. We will be perfect. You won't even know we are there. I am sure I won't, I said. Now, if you will excuse me. I have a company to run. My assistant has booked you a suite at the hotel, not the Obsidian. of course. It is fully booked, but a nice place nearby. I hit the intercom. Sarah, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Fairbanks out. They left beaming. They left thinking they had hooked the whale. They didn't see the harpoon hidden in my smile. 10 minutes later, Julian burst into my office. He had watched the entire meeting on the security feed. He looked furious. Why did you let them lie to you? He demanded, pacing the room. Why didn't you throw them out? My foot slipped? We searched for you? It makes me sick. It is a story, Julian, I said calmly, sitting back down at my desk. And stories only work if the audience believes them. You are not seriously going to give them $2 million, he said, stopping in front of my desk. I am not going to give them a dime, I replied. I am going to give them a front row seat to their own funeral. Gloria, this is risky, Julian said, his voice softening. They are unstable. If they realize you are playing them. They won't, I assured him. They are blinded by greed. They saw the office. They saw the shoes. They saw the invitation. They think I am the same desperate little girl who just wants mommy and daddy's approval. They think they can milk me for the rest of their lives. I pulled up the seating chart for the wedding on my tablet. I am putting them at table 1, I said. The head table? Julian asked. With your family? No, I said. Table 1 is the VIP table. It is right next to the stage. It is where I am seating the district attorney, the chief of police, and the senior partners of the law firm that handles the trust fund. Julian looked at the chart, then at me. His eyes widened. You are putting them in a shark tank, he whispered. I am putting them in the spotlight, I corrected. I told them they would be guests of honor. I didn't lie. Everyone is going to be looking at them, especially when the show starts. And the money? The only thing they are going to inherit is the wind, I said. And maybe a prison sentence. I looked at the empty chairs where my parents had sat. I could still smell my mother's cloying perfume, a scent of gardenias and desperation. They pushed me down the stairs to get money, I said softly. Now, I am going to pull the rug out from under them, and this time, there won't be a landing to catch them. Julian walked around the desk and kissed my forehead. You are terrifying, he murmured. I learned from the best, I said. The game was on. They were in the city. They were in the trap. And in 48 hours, the curtain would rise on the final act of the tragedy of the House of Fairbanks. Only this time, the daughter doesn't die. This time, the daughter holds the knife. The Obsidian Plaza had been transformed into a winter garden that defied the laws of nature and economics. We had imported 20,000 white avalanche roses from Ecuador, and their scent filled the vast, black marble ballroom with a fragrance that was sweet, heavy, and intoxicating. The ceiling, a masterpiece of modern architecture, was draped with strings of Swarovski crystals that caught the light of 500 candles, creating an illusion of a star-filled sky brought down to earth. It was perfect. It was excessive. It was exactly the kind of stage I needed for the final act of my life's greatest performance. I stood behind the double doors of the main entrance, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I wore a custom gown by a designer in Paris who usually only dressed royalty. It was silk and lace, structured to hide the slight asymmetry of my hips, with a train that flowed like liquid moonlight behind me. But the most important accessory was not the dress, nor the diamond tiara that Julian had insisted upon. It was the man standing beside me. Doctor. Elias Thorne looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo. He tugged at his bow tie, his weathered hands that had stitched me back together when I was broken meat on a stretcher, trembling slightly. You look beautiful, Gloria, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. But are you sure about this? About me walking you? It is going to provoke them. That is the point. Elias, I said, adjusting his lapel. I want them provoked. I want them angry. Anger makes people sloppy, and I need them sloppy. They are sitting right at the front, Elias warned. I peeked through the curtain. They look like they are at a funeral. Good. I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. Let's go give them something to mourn. The music swelled. It was not the traditional wedding march. It was a symphonic, orchestral version of a rock ballad that Julian and I loved, a song about survival against the odds. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the light from the ballroom hit me. 500 faces turned, the cream of New York society, the titans of Silicon Valley, politicians, and celebrities, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, but my eyes locked instantly on table 1. It was positioned strategically, right next to the aisle, closest to the altar. And there they were, Conrad and Sylvia Fairbanks. My mother was wearing a silver dress that was too young for her and too sparkly for the occasion, desperate to draw attention. My father sat stiffly, his face a mask of red-flushed indignation. When they saw me, their expressions shifted from boredom to shock, but when they saw Elias holding my arm, the shock curdled into pure, unadulterated venom. I saw my father lean over to the man sitting next to him. I knew that man. He was the district attorney of New York, a man with a reputation for eating fraudsters for breakfast. My father, in his ignorance, probably just thought he was another wealthy guest to impress. As I walked down the aisle, the pain in my left leg was a distant memory. I walked with a cadence I had practiced for years. Step, pause, flow, step, pause, flow. It looked regal, not damaged. I passed table 1. I saw my mother's lips moving. She was whispering loudly to the woman on her other side, the wife of a major banking CEO. I could read her lips as clearly as if she were shouting. "That is just her doctor," Sylvia hissed, pointing a manicured nail at Elias. "He has her brainwashed. We are her real parents. It is tragic. Really, she is mentally fragile." The banker's wife looked at Sylvia with a mixture of confusion and distaste, pulling her fur stole slightly away. But Sylvia was too absorbed in her own narrative to notice the social rejection. I kept walking. I did not look at them. I looked at Julian. He was standing at the altar, looking devastating in a black velvet tuxedo. His eyes were wet. When he looked at me, he didn't see the CEO, or the victim, or the avenger. He just saw me. And that love gave me the strength to be the monster I needed to be for one more night. Elias kissed my cheek when we reached the altar. He took my hand and placed it in Julian's. "Take care of her," Elias said, his voice carrying in the acoustics of the room. "She is the daughter of my heart." I heard a distinct scoff from the front row, a sound of derision. Conrad had let his mask slip. Several guests turned to look at him, frowning. Perfect. The ceremony was brief, but heavy with meaning. The officiant, a Supreme Court justice who was a personal friend of Julian, spoke about resilience. He spoke about how true family is not defined by biology, but by loyalty. Every word was a calculated slap in the face to the couple sitting at table 1. When it was time for the vows, I turned to Julian. I took the microphone. I had written these words, not just for him, but for the audience. "Julian," I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified to every corner of the room. 5 years ago, I fell into a darkness so deep I thought I would never see the light again. I was discarded. I was told I was broken. I was told I was worth nothing. I paused. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father stiffen. He took a large gulp from the champagne glass he had somehow brought into the ceremony seating area. "But you," I continued, locking eyes with Julian, "you did not need to be asked to love me. You did not need a contract. You did not need an inheritance clause. You chose me. You chose the broken parts and the sharp edges. And because you protected me when I could not protect myself, I vow to spend the rest of my life protecting you. I vow that no one, absolutely no one, will ever take from us what we have built." Julian squeezed my hand. He knew the subtext. I am safe now, and they can't hurt me. "I do," I said. "I do," he replied. When we kissed, the room erupted in applause, but as we turned to face the crowd, the first thing I saw was my mother rolling her eyes. She was clapping, but it was a lazy, rhythmic motion, devoid of enthusiasm. She leaned into Conrad and whispered something that made him smirk. They looked like two vultures perching on a branch, waiting for the carcass to be served. The transition to the reception was seamless. The walls of the room seemed to retract, revealing a dining area set with tables covered in silver silk and centerpieces that reached toward the ceiling. Julian and I moved through the room, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, but I kept one eye on the monitors in the security room, which were streaming to my phone. I had cameras pointed directly at table 1. The feed showed Conrad and Sylvia settling in. They were already treating the waitstaff like personal servants. I watched on my screen as my father snapped his fingers at a waiter, a young man working his way through law school, and pointed aggressively at his empty glass. "Boy," I heard my father say through the audio feed, "this champagne is lukewarm. Bring me a fresh bottle, and make it the '98 vintage. Do you know who I am? I am the father of the bride. I will be signing your paycheck by tomorrow morning, so hop to it." The waiter looked stunned, but nodded politely and hurried away. "They are getting comfortable," Julian murmured in my ear as we posed for a photo with the mayor. "They think they have won," I replied, smiling for the camera. "Look at them. They are measuring the drapes." We sat at the sweetheart table, elevated slightly so we could see the entire room. Table 1 was directly below us. I had placed them there on purpose. I wanted them to feel close to the power, close enough to taste it, before I choked them with it. Dinner was served, a 5-course meal that cost $300 a plate. My parents ate like starving wolves. They devoured the lobster, the Wagyu beef, the truffle risotto. They drank with a thirst that was almost impressive. My mother was on her 4th glass of wine before the main course was even cleared. The alcohol was doing its work. It was stripping away the thin veneer of civility they had plastered on for the meeting in my office. Their voices were getting louder. "It is a bit tacky, don't you think?" Sylvia said loudly to the district attorney, gesturing with her fork. "All this black, it is so somber. When we take over the planning for the anniversary party, we will do it properly. Something with gold, something regal." The district attorney, a man named Robert Vance, no relation, which was another private joke I enjoyed, looked at her with cold, prosecutorial eyes. "Take over?" he asked. I was under the impression Gloria runs her own affairs. "Oh, please," Conrad interjected, leaning across the table, his breath likely smelling of expensive scotch and entitlement. "Gloria is a sweet girl, but she is not a leader. She needs guidance. That is why we are here, to steer the ship. We are going to restructure the family assets. Big changes coming." "Is that so?" Robert asked. His interest piqued not by respect, but by the scent of a confession. "Absolutely," Sylvia slurred slightly. "We have a verbal agreement, $2 million just to start, a down payment on our consulting services. She knows she owes us, after all the trouble she caused running away like that." I watched Robert Vance's face. He was memorizing every word. He was a man who knew a shakedown when he heard one. "Interesting," Robert said, taking a sip of his water. "And where have you been for the last 5 years? Mr. and Mrs. Fairbanks?" "Traveling," Conrad lied effortlessly. "Europe, Asia, managing our investments. We wanted to give Gloria room to grow, but she stumbled. She always stumbles. She needs her parents to pick her up." I gripped the edge of the table. "She always stumbles." The audacity of the phrase made my blood boil. They pushed me, and now they claimed they were the ones picking me up. The waiters began to pour the champagne for the toasts. The room dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. The master of ceremonies, a famous television host I had hired, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have some speeches tonight from the friends and family of the happy couple." This was the moment. I had given the MC a specific list. Elias was supposed to speak, then Julian's best friend. There was no slot for Conrad or Sylvia. But I knew them. I knew that a narcissist cannot stand to be in a room full of microphones without holding one. I saw the look pass between them. It was the same look as the one in the office. Opportunity. Conrad stood up. He adjusted his jacket, which was straining at the buttons. He didn't wait to be invited. He just started walking toward the stage. Sylvia followed him, smoothing her dress, a beatific, drunken smile plastered on her face. The MC looked confused. He checked his cue cards. He looked at me. I gave a subtle nod. "Let them—" Julian stiffened beside me. "Gloria, they are crashing the stage." "I know," I whispered, taking a sip of my sparkling water. "Let them dig the grave. Julian, we just need to push them in." Conrad walked up the stairs to the stage. He took the microphone from the startled MC's hand. The feedback whined for a second, a sharp screech that silenced the room. "Excuse me," Conrad boomed. His voice was too loud, too confident. "I think there has been a mistake in the program. You cannot have a wedding without hearing from the father of the bride." A ripple of uneasy murmuring went through the crowd. This was not charmingly spontaneous. This felt aggressive. Sylvia stepped up beside him, grabbing his arm for support. She waved to the crowd like royalty greeting her subjects. "Hello, everyone," she chirped. "We are just so overwhelmed. We had to say a few words." Conrad looked out at the sea of faces. Faces of people who earned more in a week than he had stolen in a lifetime. He puffed out his chest. "My daughter," he began, gesturing vaguely toward me. "My little Gloria. It is a miracle she is here today. A true miracle. We thought we had lost her, but she came back. She came back to the fold." He paused for dramatic effect, but the room was dead silent. It was the silence of 500 people realizing something was very, very wrong. "We have had our differences." Conrad continued, his speech slurring slightly on the word differences. "She was a rebellious child, difficult, prone to exaggeration, but we forgave her, because that is what parents do. We forgive." I felt Julian's hand tighten on my thigh. He was ready to signal security. I covered his hand with mine. "Wait." "And now," Sylvia leaned into the mic, her voice shrill. "Now we are going to be a big happy family again. Gloria has promised to take care of us, as she should. We sacrificed everything for her. Everything." So, Conrad raised his glass. "To Gloria and Julian, and to the Fairbanks legacy, may it be profitable, and to the $5 million that is going to start a new chapter for this family." He said $5 million. In the office, it had been $2 million. He had already inflated the price in his head. He was publicly extorting me in front of the richest people in New York. The silence in the room was absolute. It was thick and suffocating. Guests were exchanging horrified glances. Robert Vance was writing something down on a napkin. Conrad and Sylvia stood there, beaming, waiting for applause. They expected a standing ovation. They expected the room to bow down to their reclaimed status. Instead, there was only the sound of the air conditioning and the soft clink of a fork hitting a plate. I stood up. I did not rush. I moved with the grace of a queen who has just signed a death warrant. I picked up my own microphone, which had been resting on the table for my speech. "Thank you, Mother. Thank you, Father," I said. My voice was cool, crisp, and sober. It cut through the drunken haze of their speech like a scalpel. I walked to the edge of the platform. "You mentioned the last time we saw each other," I said, looking directly at them. "You mentioned that I was rebellious, that I stumbled." Sylvia frowned. She sensed the shift in the atmosphere. "Gloria, darling, let's not get emotional." "Emotional?" I let out a light laugh. "Oh, I am not emotional. Mother, I am nostalgic. You asked me for a gift. You asked for money to start a foundation, to restore the family name." "Yes, well," Conrad stammered, sensing the trap but unable to see the teeth yet. "It is for the family. I have a gift for you," I said. "It is not a check. It is a memory. Do you remember what you said to me on the stairs, Mother, 5 years ago? The night of the storm?" Sylvia's face went pale beneath her makeup. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," I said. "But just in case you forgot, I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. The lights in the ballroom went out completely. The only illumination came from the massive LED screen behind the stage, which flickered to life. It was not a slideshow of baby pictures. It was a waveform, an audio file. And then, the voice filled the room. It was huge. It was distorted by time, but undeniable in its clarity. Get rid of it, Conrad. Just get rid of it. The trap had snapped shut. The wedding was over. The trial had begun. The master of ceremonies, a man who had hosted the Academy Awards twice and was accustomed to managing the egos of Hollywood, looked genuinely terrified. He tried to reach for the microphone, his hand hovering in the air. But Conrad Fairbanks had gripped the stand with the desperation of a drowning man holding on to a piece of driftwood. My father's knuckles were white. The veins in his neck were bulging against the collar of his dress shirt, which was now unbuttoned at the top, his bow tie hanging loose like a dead snake. The room had gone from a polite, celebratory hum to a silence so profound I could hear the ice melting in the water glasses at table 4. "Thank you. Thank you," Conrad bellowed, his voice booming through the speakers with a sharp feedback whine that made several guests wince. He waved his free hand wildly, splashing a few drops of his '98 vintage champagne onto the stage floor. "You know, they told us we were not on the schedule. Can you believe that? A wedding without a toast from the father? It is preposterous. But we forgive them. We forgive the oversight." Sylvia stepped up beside him. She had abandoned her wineglass at the table, but she swayed slightly in her silver heels. She grabbed the microphone stand with both hands, pulling it closer to her painted red lips. Her eyes were bright, glassy, and manic. She looked out at the audience, at the billionaires, the politicians, the tech moguls, and she did not see people. She saw ATMs. She saw a captive audience that she could charm into submission. "We are just so full of love tonight," Sylvia slurred slightly, pitching her voice into that sugary, high register she used when she was lying. "Conrad and I have been through so much these past 5 years, so much heartache. When she left us." She paused, looking down at me. I was sitting at the sweetheart table, my face impassive, my hands resting calmly on the white tablecloth. I did not blink. I wanted her to look at me. I wanted her to see that I was not looking away. "When she left us," Sylvia continued, sniffing loudly, "we were devastated. We thought we had failed her. But we realize now that she just needed to fly. She was a little bird who needed to leave the nest, even if she broke the branch on the way out, even if she broke our hearts." A murmur went through the crowd. It was not a murmur of sympathy. It was the sound of 500 intelligent people detecting a false note. Julian stiffened beside me, his jaw set so hard I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. I placed a hand on his forearm, a silent command to stay seated. "But we never stopped praying," Conrad interjected, leaning into the mic so close that his breath popped on the plosives. "We kept the house ready. We kept her room exactly as she left it. We sacrificed our own financial security to keep the search going. We spent everything, every dime, because what is money compared to family? Nothing. Money is nothing." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "But let us be honest," Conrad said, leaning over the stage edge, trying to make eye contact with Robert Vance, the district attorney. "The world runs on capital, and we exhausted ours trying to bring our daughter home. We took the hit, we took the fall, and we did it with a smile." This was the pivot. I watched it happen in real time. The shift from the emotional manipulation to the financial shakedown. It was clumsy, it was drunk, and it was absolutely magnificent for my purposes. "And that brings us to tonight," Sylvia said, taking the lead again. She straightened her spine, trying to summon the ghost of the socialite she used to be. "Tonight is about new beginnings. It is about restoration. Conrad and I have been talking, and we have decided to launch a new initiative, the Fairbanks Family Foundation. There was no foundation. I knew it. They knew it. The only charity they supported was the one that paid for their liquor and gambling debts. We want to help other families who have lost their way, Sylvia declared, her voice gaining strength. We want to build a legacy, but legacies require seed money. They require investment. She turned to look directly at me. The spotlight caught the glitter of her dress, making her look like a disco ball that had fallen off the ceiling. Gloria. Darling, she said, her voice amplified to a deafening volume. You have done so well for yourself. You have this company. You have this empire. And we are so proud. But an empire means nothing if you leave your roots behind to rot. The room was holding its breath. I could feel the tension vibrating in the air. This was a public mugging. So, Sylvia smiled, a wide, predatory grin that showed all her teeth. We think it is only fitting, as a gesture of gratitude, as a gesture of love, and to kickstart this foundation that will bear our name, we are asking you to match our sacrifice. We are asking for a donation, a wedding gift to your parents. She paused for dramatic effect. $5 million, Sylvia said. The number hung in the air like a foul smell. $5 million, she repeated, looking around the room as if expecting applause. It is a drop in the bucket for Vanguard Systems, but for the Fairbanks Foundation, it is a revolution. It is the price of family unity, and I think everyone here would agree that family is worth it. She looked out at the guests, nodding encouragingly, trying to compel them to clap. Nobody clapped. The silence was excruciating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere in the back. Someone cleared their throat. Conrad, sensing the awkwardness, tried to salvage the moment. "Come on," he shouted. "Let's hear it for the bride. Let's hear it for the check. It is tax deductible. Darling, write it off." Julian started to stand up. He looked ready to storm the stage and physically remove them. "No," I said softly. I stood up. I did not move quickly. I moved with the fluid. Deliberate grace of a predator who knows the trap has already been sprung. I picked up my handheld microphone from the table. The sound technician, who had been briefed by me hours ago, immediately cut the feed to the stage microphone. Conrad was still talking, his mouth moving, his arms waving, but no sound came out. He tapped the mic, frowned, and then looked at me. The room turned its attention to me. The spotlight shifted, leaving my parents in semi-darkness while I was bathed in a pool of stark, white light. I walked out from behind the table. I did not look at the crowd. I walked toward the stage until I was standing right below them. Looking up, the angle was intentional. They were higher than me, but I was the one in control. "Mother," I said. My voice was calm. It was not the voice of the hysterical girl on the stairs. It was the voice of the chief operating officer of a $12 billion company. It was cold, precise, and devoid of fear. Sylvia blinked, surprised by the sudden silence of her own microphone and the commanding presence of my voice. She lowered the stand, looking down at me with a mix of confusion and annoyance. "Gloria," she shouted, her voice thin without amplification. "We are in the middle of a speech. Fix the sound." "There is nothing wrong with the sound," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the hall. "I cut your mic because I have a question." Conrad leaned over, his face flushed purple. "You cut the mic? You insolent little—" "Quiet, Conrad," Sylvia snapped at him, then turned her fake smile back to me. "A question? Well, ask away. Darling, is it about the check? We can accept a wire transfer, or stock options. We are flexible." I stared at her. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I let the audience lean in. I wanted them to hear every syllable. "You talked about love," I said. "You talked about sacrifice. You told these people that I ran away, that I broke your hearts." "It is the truth," Sylvia cried out, playing to the back row. "You abandoned us." "Did I?" I asked. I took a step closer to the stage. 5 years ago, I said. October 24th, a Tuesday. It was raining. "Do you remember the rain, Mother?" Sylvia frowned. A flicker of unease passed behind her eyes. I suppose. It rains often in Chicago. We were on the second floor, I continued, keeping my eyes locked on hers. At the top of the mahogany staircase, you were wearing a blue silk dressing gown. Father was drinking scotch. I was pregnant. The word pregnant landed like a stone. I saw Martha Thorne, sitting at table 2, cover her mouth with her hand. We were arguing about the trust fund, I said. I refused to sign the papers. I refused to let you gamble away my grandmother's legacy. I told you I was leaving. You were hysterical, Conrad shouted from the stage, his voice cracking. You were out of your mind. I was leaving, I repeated, ignoring him. I turned to go to my room to pack, and you looked at Father. You looked him right in the eyes. I paused. I saw Sylvia's throat work as she swallowed. She gripped the microphone stand tighter, her knuckles turning ivory white. She knew, somewhere, deep in that reptilian brain of hers, she knew what was coming. You gave him an order, I said. Do you remember the order, Mother? This is ridiculous, Sylvia scoffed, but her voice wavered. She looked at the crowd, her smile twitching. She is having an episode. Julian, please, get her some water. She is delusional. I am not delusional, I said. I am the most lucid person in this room. I want you to tell these people, your future donors, what you said to Father right before I fell. I said nothing, Sylvia shrieked. I was in the bath. I told you I came running when I heard the crash. You were standing 3 feet away, I said. You were smoking a cigarette. You flicked the ash onto the carpet, and you looked at my stomach. I touched my own stomach now, a subconscious gesture, protecting the new life growing there, a life she would never touch. You looked at my stomach, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone carried to the furthest corners of the room. And you said 7 words. Do you remember them? Sylvia took a step back. She looked trapped. She looked at Conrad, but he was useless, swaying and muttering to himself. She looked at the exit, but it was blocked by security. I don't know what you are imagining, Gloria, Sylvia hissed, but this is a wedding. Stop making a scene. Give us the money and let us sit down. You don't remember? I asked. Allow me to remind you. I lowered the microphone slightly. I looked at her with a pity that was far colder than hate. You said, get rid of it. Conrad, just get rid of it. Sylvia froze. Her face went the color of old ash. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as if I had slapped her. And then, I continued, relentlessly. Father pushed me. He put his hands on my shoulders and he shoved me backward. Liar, Conrad screamed. He lunged toward the edge of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at me. You fell, you clumsy, ungrateful bitch. You fell. The crowd gasped. The slur echoed in the luxurious ballroom. The mask had slipped completely. I fell, I agreed calmly. I fell down 20 stairs. I broke my femur. I broke my collarbone. I lay at the bottom of the stairs, bleeding. I was losing the baby. I was in agony. I took a breath. This was the part that still haunted me. And you walked down the stairs, I said. You stood over me. You checked my pulse. And then you waited. We called the ambulance immediately, Sylvia cried, her voice rising to a panic. We called 911. No, I said. You didn't. You waited 20 minutes. You waited because you wanted to make sure the baby was dead. You wanted to make sure the heir was gone so you could access the trust fund. That is a lie, Sylvia screamed. She looked around the room, her eyes wide and terrified. She is lying. She is sick. None of this happened. There is no proof. It is her word against ours. Proof? I asked. I smiled. It was the smile of the executioner raising the axe. You are right, Mother. In a court of law, it is usually one word against another. But you forgot something about the house. You forgot about the smart home system Father installed in 2015, the one with the audio sensors in the hallway, the one that backs up to the cloud. Sylvia stopped moving. She stopped breathing. I accessed the cloud. "Mother," I said softly, "I have the recording. I have had it for 5 years." "No," she whispered. "No, that is impossible." "Is it?" I asked. I turned my back to them. I faced the audience. I faced the giant LED screen that had been displaying our engagement photos all night. "You asked for a gift," I said to the room. "You asked for $5 million to start a foundation based on truth and family values. I think the best gift I can give you is the truth." I raised my hand toward the sound booth. "Play it," I said. Sylvia let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "Gloria, don't! Don't you dare!" But it was too late. The room darkened completely. The screen flickered black, and the speakers, the best sound system money could buy, crackled with the static of a stormy night in Chicago. I walked back to Julian and sat down. He took my hand. His grip was iron. "Watch," I whispered to him. "Watch them drown." On the stage, Conrad and Sylvia stood paralyzed, two ghosts caught in the harsh light of their own sins. As the voice from the past began to fill the room, the ballroom of the Obsidian Plaza was plunged into a darkness so absolute it felt physical, like a heavy velvet curtain dropping over the world. The only light came from the massive LED screen behind the stage, which had, until seconds ago, been cycling through tasteful black and white photos of Julian and me walking in Central Park. Now, those images are gone. In their place was a stark, minimalist graphic. It was a digital audio interface, a black background with a single, horizontal green line running through the center. A timestamp glowed in the top right corner in jagged white font. October 24th, 2021, 11:14 p.m. The silence in the room was not empty. It was pressurized. 500 guests, the elite of New York society, sat frozen in their chairs. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Champagne glasses remained suspended in midair. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Then, the sound began. It started with the static hiss of a high-gain microphone, followed immediately by the unmistakable, rhythmic drumming of heavy rain against glass. The audio quality was eerie, slightly tinny, processed through the compression of a cloud server, but terrifyingly clear. It sounded like a ghost whispering directly into the ear of every person in the room. "You are being selfish, Gloria," a woman's voice said from the speakers. The room collectively flinched. It was Sylvia Fairbank's voice, but it was not the shrill, performative voice she had been using on stage moments ago. It was the voice of the woman in the blue silk dressing gown, cold, bored, and dripping with disdain. On the screen, subtitles appeared in bold white text, syncing perfectly with the audio, ensuring that not a single syllable could be missed or scrutinized. "You are being selfish." Gloria. I watched my mother on the stage. She was illuminated only by the backwash of light from the screen. She looked small. She looked shrunken. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish on a dock. But no sound came out. She was staring at the screen, staring at the timestamp, realizing that the house she had sold, the house she thought was just a building, had been a witness all along. The recording continued. The argument played out. My voice, younger and trembling, pleading for my inheritance, my father's voice, slurred with whiskey, demanding I sign the papers. The desperation in his tone was pathetic, stripping away the successful investor persona he had tried to wear tonight like a cheap suit. Then came the pivot. "I am leaving," my voice said on the recording, "and if you try to stop me, I will call the police." There was a pause in the audio, a distinct, heavy silence where the waveform on the screen flattened. Then, the line that I had quoted only moments before tore through the ballroom. "Get rid of it, Conrad," Sylvia's voice commanded. "Just get rid of it. If she produces an heir, we lose everything." The reaction in the room was visceral. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the space. I saw the wife of the bank CEO, the woman Sylvia had been trying to impress earlier, physically recoil, She covered her mouth with a napkin, her eyes wide with horror. She looked at Sylvia not as a social climber, but as something feral. "Do it!" the recording hissed. Then came the sounds of violence. The audio system in the Obsidian Plaza was state-of-the-art, designed for concert performances. It rendered the sounds with sickening fidelity, the scuffle of leather shoes on wood, the sharp intake of breath, and then the scream. My scream. It was a raw, primal sound of terror that cut through the sophistication of the evening like a serrated knife. It was the sound of a woman realizing she was being murdered by her own father. The guests flinched. I saw a tech billionaire in the front row look away, unable to watch the screen as the sound of the fall began. Thump. The first impact was heavy, a dull, meat-slapping wood sound. Crack. The sound of my collarbone snapping was sharp, like a pistol shot. Thump, thump, thump. The tumbling continued for what felt like an eternity. The audio captured the chaotic, rhythmic destruction of a human body surrendering to gravity. It was brutal. It was unpolished. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard. And I made them listen to every single second of it. When the final thud echoed, the sound of me hitting the marble foyer floor, the waveform on the screen spiked red. Then, flatlined. Total silence returned to the recording, save for the rain. On the stage, Conrad was shaking. He was gripping the podium so hard I thought he might snap the wood. He was looking at the screen with the eyes of a trapped animal, sweat pouring down his face, ruining his expensive fake tan. But the recording was not finished. "Is she dead?" Conrad's voice whispered from the speakers. "Quiet," Sylvia's voice replied. "She is alive," Conrad said a moment later. "The pulse is weak, but it is there. We have to call 911. Conrad needs to call 911 right now." I saw Robert Vance, the district attorney, lean forward. He was no longer a wedding guest. He was a prosecutor. He was staring at the stage with a look of intense, predatory focus. He was witnessing a confession. "No," Sylvia said on the tape. "Sylvia, she could die," Conrad pleaded. "If she lives, she talks," Sylvia replied, her voice as smooth and cold as a glacier. "And if she talks, we go to prison, and we lose the money," the crowd murmured. It was an angry buzzing sound now. The shock had worn off. Replaced by revulsion, people were standing up, not to leave, but to see better, to look at the monsters. "She is bleeding," Conrad said on the recording. "Don't call 911 yet. Let it finish." Let it finish. Those 3 words hung in the air, vibrating with malice. They were the death knell of the Fairbanks reputation. They were the nail in the coffin. 15 more minutes, Sylvia's voice said. "Pour yourself a drink. Conrad." The recording ended with the sharp click of a lighter. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The horror of what they had just heard, the casual, calculated decision to let a pregnant daughter bleed out on the floor for money, was too immense to process immediately. Then, the dam broke. "You monsters!" a woman shouted from the back of the room. I recognized her as one of the board members of a major children's charity. She was standing, pointing a shaking finger at the stage. "Murderers!" someone else yelled. The room erupted. It was not a riot, but it was a social execution. People were turning their backs. The banker's wife stood up, grabbed her purse, and deliberately moved 3 tables away, as if proximity to my parents would infect her. Conrad Fairbanks snapped. The reality of his situation hit him like a physical blow. He saw the faces of the people he had tried to swindle. He saw the district attorney pulling out his phone. He saw the end of his life. "No!" Conrad screamed. It was a ragged, desperate sound. "No, that is fake. That is AI. It is a deep fake. She made it up." He lunged toward the edge of the stage, his eyes locking on me. I was still sitting at the table, calm, unmoving, watching him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. "Turn it off!" Conrad roared, jumping down from the stage. He stumbled, his legs weak from alcohol and fear. but he scrambled up, charging toward the sound booth at the back of the room. "Turn it off! I will sue you! I will kill you!" He didn't make it 5 steps. Julian had prepared for this. He had hired a private security firm, comprised mostly of former Special Forces operatives. They did not look like bouncers. They looked like statues in suits. 2 of them stepped out from the shadows near table 1. They moved with a synchronized, fluid efficiency. Conrad ran straight into the first guard. It was like watching a child run into a brick wall. The guard didn't even flinch. He simply caught Conrad by the shoulders, absorbing the momentum, and then twisted, in one smooth motion. My father was spun around and pinned against the edge of the stage. His arm twisted behind his back. He yelped in pain, a sharp, pathetic sound that was satisfyingly similar to the noises he had made on the recording. "Let go of me!" Conrad shrieked, kicking his legs. "Do you know who I am? I am the father of the bride." "You are a threat to the guests," the guard said, his voice a low rumble. "Stay down." On the stage, Sylvia had not moved. She was frozen in a rictus of terror. She looked at Conrad being pinned. She looked at the hostile crowd. She looked at Robert Vance, who was now walking toward the stage with 2 police officers who had been waiting in the wings, uninvited guests I had added to the list. Sylvia's knees gave out. She didn't faint. She just crumpled. She sank to the floor of the stage, her silver dress pooling around her like spilled mercury. She put her hands over her ears, shaking her head back and forth, muttering something no one could hear. I stood up again. The room quieted down instantly. They wanted to hear the verdict. They wanted the final word. I walked over to where Conrad was pinned. He looked up at me, his face pressed against the black carpet, his eyes red and wet with tears of self-pity. "Gloria," he wheezed. "Gloria, please. It was a mistake. We were desperate. We are your parents." I looked down at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, and then pushed me down a flight of stairs. I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just a cold, surgical satisfaction. I raised the microphone. "You are right, Father," I said. "You are my parents. Biology dictates that. But family? Family protects you. Family does not wait 20 minutes for you to die." I turned to Sylvia, who was sobbing on the stage. "You wanted an investment," I said to her. "You wanted $5 million to save your reputation, but you forgot the most basic rule of business. Mother, you have to pay your debts." I walked back to the center of the room, addressing the entire assembly. "5 years ago, you pushed me," I said, my voice ringing with the strength of the woman I had built myself into. "You thought you pushed me into a grave. You thought you pushed me into silence." I took Julian's hand. He stood beside me, a pillar of unshakable support. "But you were wrong," I declared. "You did not push me down. You pushed me out of your lives. You pushed me into a world where I learned my own worth. A world where I learned that blood does not make you family. Loyalty does." I looked back at them one last time. Conrad, pinned and broken. Sylvia, weeping on the floor. "And today," I said, my voice dropping to a final, heavy cadence, "I am putting you back in your place, not in my life, not in my wallet, but in the dark, where you belong." I signaled to the security team. "Get them out of my sight," I ordered, as the guards hauled Conrad to his feet, and the police officers ascended the stage to collect Sylvia. The room erupted again, but this time, it was not in horror. It started with one person. I think it was Elias Thorne. He stood up and began to clap. Then Martha stood up, then Julian's best friend, then the mayor, then the district attorney. Within 10 seconds, 500 people were on their feet, applauding. They were not applauding the drama. They were applauding the justice. They were applauding the fact that the girl who fell down the stairs had finally climbed back up, and she had brought the thunder with her. I watched as my parents were dragged toward the side exit, their protests drowned out by the thunderous sound of my victory. I did not look away. I watched until the doors closed behind them, sealing them out of my future forever. Then, and only then, did I let out the breath I had been holding for 5 years. "Are you okay?" Julian whispered, leaning close to my ear. I looked at him. I looked at the man who loved me, the man who had helped me build this moment. "I am better than okay," I said, and for the first time in a decade. My smile reached my eyes. "I am free." The security guards had Conrad by the arms, dragging him toward the exit like a sack of unwanted trash. But he was not going quietly. Desperation had given him a surge of hysterical strength. He dug his heels into the plush carpet, twisting his body violently until he managed to rip one arm free. "Wait!" Conrad screamed, his voice cracking with the raw panic of a man watching his entire existence disintegrate. "Wait, you cannot do this! I am her father!" He pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes bulging. "Listen to me!" he bellowed at the district attorney, at the police officers, at anyone who would listen. "That recording changes nothing about the law. She is my daughter. I am the legal guardian of the Fairbanks estate. The trust fund is under my control until she turns 30. If she is alive, I am still the trustee. That is the law." He looked at me with a twisted, triumphant sneer, thinking he had found a loophole in the moral outrage. "You can hate me, Gloria," he shouted. "You can play your little tapes, but you cannot change the ink on a birth certificate. I own you. I own your assets. You are still a minor in the eyes of the trust until you prove competence, and I will tie you up in court for 20 years. You will never see a dime of that money unless I sign off on it." The room fell silent again. It was a different kind of silence this time. It was the uneasy silence of people who knew that the law was often a cold, unfeeling machine that did not care about justice, only about paperwork. Conrad was right about one thing. In the rigid world of old money trusts, the patriarch often held the keys, regardless of his sins. I held up a hand to the security guards. "Stop," I said. The guards paused, looking at me for confirmation. "Let him speak," I said. "I want him to finish his thought." Conrad straightened his jacket. Though it was hopelessly rumpled, he panted heavily, trying to regain a shred of dignity. He thought he had found leverage. He thought he was negotiating. "You see?" Conrad said, smoothing his hair, turning to the crowd. "It is a family matter, a complex legal matter. Gloria is emotional. But the fact remains, I am her next of kin. I am the executor. If she wants access to her grandmother's money, she has to deal with me. We can work this out. Gloria, we can forget the police. We can structure a deal." I looked at Julian. He was smiling. It was a small, dangerous smile. He knew what was in the briefcase sitting under our table. I walked down the few steps from the platform to the main floor, closing the distance between myself and my father. I wanted him to see my eyes. I wanted him to see that there was no fear, only the calm finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. "You are relying on the law, Father?" I asked softly. "The law is the law," Conrad scoffed, gaining confidence. "You are Gloria Fairbanks. I am Conrad Fairbanks. That is the chain of title." "That is an interesting point," I said. "But you are operating on old information." I turned to the district attorney, Robert Vance, who was standing a few feet away, watching the exchange with intense fascination. "Mr. Vance," I said, "you are familiar with the concept of legal identity, are you not?" "I am," Robert replied, crossing his arms. "And you are familiar with the legal process required to claim a life insurance payout on a deceased person?" I asked. Conrad's face twitched. "That was a mistake. We thought you were dead." "You did," I agreed. "In fact, you were so convinced I was dead that you filed a petition with the state of Illinois to have me declared legally deceased in absentia 5 years ago. You expedited the process to get the $2 million. You signed an affidavit under penalty of perjury stating that you had no knowledge of my whereabouts and believed me to be deceased. So?" Conrad snapped. "You are alive now. We rescind the death certificate. It is a paperwork error. We pay back the insurance. We still keep the trust." It is not that simple, I said. See, when you declared Gloria Fairbanks dead, you legally terminated her existence, but that is not the part that destroys you. I signaled to Julian. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. He walked over and handed it to me. The part that destroys you, I said, opening the folder, is what happened 6 months after my death. I pulled out a document. It was stamped with the official seal of the state of Vermont. When I recovered from my injuries, I said, my voice projecting clearly, I was a woman without a name. I was a ghost, but I had people who loved me, people who did not see me as a paycheck. I looked at Dr. Elias Thorne. He was weeping silently, holding Martha's hand. In the state of Vermont, I explained, holding up the document for Conrad to see. There is a statute that allows for adult adoption. It allows a person over the age of 18 to be legally adopted by another adult, provided there is consent from all parties. It is designed to formalize relationships of care and inheritance. Conrad squinted at the paper. What is that? This, I said, is a decree of adoption, dated 4 years and 6 months ago, signed by a judge in Burlington. I took a step closer, shoving the paper toward his face. On that day, the person formerly known as Gloria Fairbanks ceased to exist in any capacity relevant to you. I was legally adopted by Elias and Martha Thorne. My birth certificate was sealed and reissued. My legal name became Gloria Thorne. Conrad blanched. That doesn't matter. You are still my blood. The trust is for the grandchildren of Eleanor Fairbanks. Read the trust, Conrad, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Grandmother Eleanor hated you. She knew exactly what you were. She knew you would try to bleed her estate dry. I pulled a second document from the folder. It was a copy of my grandmother's will, yellowed with age but ironclad in its authority. Grandmother included a specific clause regarding the definition of heir, I said. Clause 4A. In the event that the beneficiary is legally adopted out of the Fairbanks family line due to negligence, abuse, or estrangement, the beneficiary retains full rights to the trust, but the biological parents are immediately and irrevocably stripped of all guardianship rights, trustee status, and residual claims. Conrad's mouth fell open. He shook his head. No, she wouldn't do that. She did, I said, but she added one more failsafe, the bad actor clause. I turned the page, pointing to a paragraph highlighted in red. Clause 7C, I read aloud. If the biological parents are found to have caused physical harm or attempted to cause the death of the beneficiary for the purpose of accessing the funds, the trust automatically dissolves its trustee structure. The principal sum, all $40 million, transfers immediately and directly to the beneficiary, regardless of age, and the perpetrators are to be sued by the estate for damages. I looked up from the paper. The recording we just heard? I said. That was not just for dramatic effect. Father, that was the evidence required to trigger Clause 7C. My lawyers filed this evidence with the probate court at 9 o'clock this morning. At 9:30, the judge signed the order. I smiled. You are not the trustee, Conrad. You are not my guardian. You are not even my father in the eyes of the law. You are a stranger who assaulted a woman named Gloria Thorne. And the $40 million? It was transferred into an account solely in my name 3 hours ago. Conrad looked at the papers. He looked at the seal. He looked at the truth staring him in the face. The logic was airtight. The trap was bureaucratic, unsexy, and absolutely inescapable. You planned this, he whispered. For 5 years? For 1,825 days, I corrected him. I built a new name. I built a new face. I built a new life legally separate from you so that when this moment came, you wouldn't just lose a daughter. You would lose the only thing you ever actually loved. I closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot. You are bankrupt, Conrad, I said. The $2 million from the insurance? You spent it. And since I am alive, the insurance company is going to want that money back. They will come for your assets. They will come for your car, your watch, and the clothes on your back. You have nothing." Sylvia, who had been sobbing on the edge of the stage, looked up. The word bankrupt seemed to pierce through her hysteria. "No," she wailed. "We have the condo. We have the jewelry." "Leased," I said coldly. "And the jewelry is paste. I saw the pawn shop receipts in your digital trash bin." I turned back to the security guards. "Mr. Fairbanks and Mrs. Fairbanks are trespassing," I said calmly. "They are not family, they are not guests, and they are currently wanted for insurance fraud, attempted murder, and extortion." I looked at Robert Vance. "Mr. District Attorney," I said, "I believe you have enough for an indictment?" Robert Vance stepped forward, his face grim but admiring. He adjusted his cufflinks and nodded to the police officers. "More than enough, Mrs. Vance," he said. "Officers, take them into custody." Conrad tried to back away, but the fight had gone out of him. The realization that he had lost on a technicality, that his own greed in declaring me dead had paved the way for his total legal erasure, broke him. He slumped in the grip of the guards. "I am your father," he whispered again. But it was a question now, not a demand. "No," I said, turning my back on him to look at Elias Thorne. "My father is the man who taught me how to walk again. My father is the man who sat by my bed when I screamed from the nightmares. You are just a donor who made a bad investment." I looked at the crowd. "Please," I said to the guests, my voice returning to the gracious tone of a hostess, "do not let this interrupt the celebration. We are just taking out the trash," as the police handcuffed Conrad and hauled Sylvia up from the floor. The room remained silent for a heartbeat, processing the sheer, brutal elegance of the legal checkmate. I had not just defeated them, I had erased them. I had used their own weapons, paperwork, laws, and money, to dismantle their existence. Then, Julian started clapping. Slow, steady applause, and the room followed. I watched them go. I watched the gold doors of the ballroom close behind the weeping woman in the silver dress and the broken man in the ruined suit. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Elias. "Eleanor would have been proud," he whispered. "She knew," I said, clutching the folder to my chest. "She knew one day I would need a weapon. She just didn't know I would have to become one to use it." The twist was complete. The past was legally severed. I was Gloria Vance. I was Gloria Thorne. And for the first time in my life, I was nobody's victim. The arrival of the uniformed officers was not chaotic. It was surgical. They did not burst through the doors with guns drawn. They materialized from the shadows of the ballroom wings, 4 men and 2 women in the crisp, dark blue uniforms of the New York Police Department. They moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a glacier. District Attorney Robert Vance stepped back, allowing the law to take its course. He adjusted his suit jacket, his job done, his face set in a grim line of satisfaction. Conrad saw them coming. For a moment, I saw the fight leave his eyes. Replaced by a sheer, animalistic terror, he had spent his entire life thinking that money and a surname were shields that could deflect any arrow. He had believed that consequences were things that happened to poor people, to people without summer homes and trust funds. Now, staring at the badge of the lead officer, he realized that his shield was made of paper, and I had just set a match to it. "Conrad Fairbanks," the lead officer said, his voice carrying over the low hum of the room. "You are under arrest." "On what grounds?" Conrad spat, though the venom was weak, diluted by fear. "This is a civil matter. My daughter is hysterical. We are having a family dispute. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Gloria Fairbanks," the officer recited, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the light of the chandeliers, gleaming like jewelry, but far colder. "Additionally, you are charged with first-degree insurance fraud, grand larceny, and extortion." "Attempted murder?" Conrad shrieked as the officer grabbed his wrist. "That tape proves nothing. It is hearsay. It is out of context." "You can explain the context to a jury," the officer said, snapping the first cuff onto Conrad's wrist. The sound was a sharp, mechanical click, a sound of finality. "Turn around!" Conrad resisted. He tried to twist away, his shoes squeaking on the polished stage floor. "Get your hands off me. Do you know how much taxes I pay? I demand to speak to my lawyer. Arthur, call Arthur." But Arthur, the family lawyer, was nowhere to be seen. If he was in the room, he was smart enough to be hiding behind a centerpiece, distancing himself from the sinking ship, on the other side of the stage. A female officer approached Sylvia. My mother was still on the floor, her silver dress pooling around her like the skin of a shed snake. She looked up at the officer, her mascara running in black rivulets down her cheeks, ruining the face she had spent thousands of dollars to maintain. "Mrs. Fairbanks," the officer said, not unkindly but firmly. "Stand up, please." Sylvia shook her head. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, vacant holes. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. "Gloria," she whispered. "Gloria, tell them it was a joke. We were just joking. We are family. You cannot let them take Mommy to jail. The clothes, the food. I cannot eat prison food. Gloria, I have allergies." It was pathetic. It was grotesque. Even in the face of incarceration, her narcissism remained intact. She wasn't worried about the morality of her crimes. She was worried about the menu. "Stand up," the officer repeated, gripping Sylvia's arm and hoisting her to her feet. Sylvia let out a wail that sounded like a siren. "Conrad, do something! Fix this!" "I cannot fix it," Conrad yelled back, his arms now wrenched behind his back, the second cuff locking into place. "She ruined us. The ungrateful little witch ruined us." They were dragged to the center of the stage. The police were efficient. They did not rough them up. They simply treated them like cargo. Dangerous, volatile cargo that needed to be removed from civilized society. I stood on the raised platform of the sweetheart table, looking down at them. The elevation difference was only a few feet, but it felt like miles. I felt tall. I felt titanic. The white silk of my wedding dress flowed around me, bright and pure, a stark contrast to the tarnished silver and rumpled black of their attire. Julian stood beside me, his hand resting on the small of my back, a constant, warm anchor. To my right, Elias Thorne wiped a tear from his cheek, his other arm wrapped protectively around Martha. They were my wall. They were my fortress. I looked at Conrad. Our eyes met one last time. I expected to feel a surge of anger. I expected to feel the heat of that hatred I had nursed for 5 years, the fire that had kept me warm through the pain of rehabilitation and the lonely nights of building my company. But as I looked at him, red-faced, sweating, defeated, muttering curses at the floor, the fire went out. The anger evaporated. In its place was a profound, icy pity. He was not a monster. Monsters are scary. Monsters have power. He was just a small, greedy man who had traded his soul for a lifestyle he couldn't afford. He was a parasite that had been pulled off the host and was now shriveling in the sun. "Wait," I said into the microphone. The officers paused. The room held its breath. Was I going to show mercy? Was I going to crack? I walked to the edge of the platform. I looked down at them with the calm, detached gaze of a queen looking at a rebellious servant who had already been sentenced. "I do not hate you," I said. My voice was soft, but in the silence of the ballroom, it carried to the rafters. Hating you would mean you still have power over me. Hating you would mean you matter. Conrad stopped struggling. He stared up at me, his mouth open. "I pity you," I continued. "You had a daughter who would have walked through fire for you. You had a grandchild on the way who would have loved you. You had a home, you had a legacy, and you threw it all away for a check that you spent in 5 years. I shifted my gaze to Sylvia. She was trembling. leaning against the female officer for support. "You worried about the food in prison, Mother?" I asked. "Do not worry. I hear the schedule is very consistent. You like routine. And you won't have to worry about the stairs. It is all on one level." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It was a dark, nervous laughter. But it broke the tension. It stripped them of their dignity. "Get them out of here," I said, turning away. "They are ruining the decor." The officers resumed their march. Conrad began to shout again, incoherent threats about lawsuits and disinheritance, but nobody was listening. The guests were watching me. Sylvia's heels dragged on the floor, scraping loudly, leaving scuff marks on the pristine white stage, her final, messy mark on my life. They were led down the stairs, past the tables of the people they had tried to impress. I watched the faces of the guests as my parents passed. There was no sympathy, there was only judgment. The district attorney watched them go with a satisfied nod. The bank CEO turned his chair so his back was fully to them. The double doors at the back of the room swung open. The cold air of the corridor rushed in. The officers pushed them through, and then the doors closed. The click of the latch was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of a heavy burden being dropped after a 5-year hike. The room was silent for 1 second, 2 seconds. Then, Julian took the microphone from my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady and joyous, "I apologize for the interruption. It seems we had some uninvited pests, but the exterminators have done their job." The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a roar. People were cheering. Glasses were raised. The tension that had gripped the room shattered, replaced by a euphoric sense of release. Justice is a rare thing to witness in the real world. And tonight, everyone had gotten a front row seat. I felt Elias's hand on my shoulder. I turned to him, the old doctor, the man who had saved my life in a rain-slicked hospital room, was smiling. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated pride. "You did it, kid," he whispered. "You really did it." "We did it," I corrected. Pulling him into a hug, I buried my face in his shoulder, smelling the scent of antiseptic and peppermint that I had come to associate with safety. "Thank you for saving me." "Dad." I called him Dad. It was the first time I had said it out loud in public. Elias stiffened, then hugged me back so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Martha joined us, wrapping her arms around both of us, weeping openly. "My brave girl," Martha sobbed. "My beautiful, brave girl." I pulled back and wiped my eyes. I refused to let my makeup run. I was the CEO of Vanguard Systems. I was Gloria Vance. I had work to do. I took the microphone back from Julian. "Everyone," I called out. The cheering subsided, settling into an attentive silence. 500 faces looked up at me with admiration. I was no longer the victim of a tragedy. I was the survivor of a war. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing the truth. And thank you for not clapping for their speech." Laughter rippled through the room. "Tonight was supposed to be a wedding," I said. "But I think it turned into something else. It turned into a funeral for the past, and I, for one, am glad to see it buried." I looked at the doors where my parents had exited. "To my parents," I said, raising my empty hand as if holding a glass. "Wherever you are headed, I hope you enjoy your new home. I hear the security is excellent. It has many more bars than the old villa, so you will be very safe." The crowd cheered again. "But for the rest of us," I shouted, signaling the band, "we have a party to finish. Music." The band, professional to a fault, immediately launched into an upbeat, funk-driven track. The lights shifted from the harsh white of the interrogation to a warm, golden party glow. The waiters, who had been frozen in the shadows, sprang back to life, pouring champagne and serving dessert. The atmosphere transformed instantly. The darkness was gone. The heavy, suffocating weight of the Fairbanks legacy had been dragged out in handcuffs. What remained was light. Julian pulled me into his arms. We were still on the platform, elevated above the swirling party. He looked into my eyes, and I saw the reflection of the woman I had become. She was scarred, she was limping, but she was whole. "Are you happy?" he asked, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "I am," I said, and I meant it. "I feel light. I feel like gravity just let go of me." "You were amazing," he said. "Terrifying, but amazing." "I had to be," I said. "For us," he kissed me. It was a slow, deep kiss that sealed the promise we had made. We weren't just partners in business or marriage. We were accomplices in justice. We danced. We danced despite my bad leg. We danced until my feet ached and my heart soared. I laughed more in that 1 hour than I had in the previous 5 years. I saw Elias and Martha dancing nearby, moving with the slow, comfortable rhythm of a couple who had weathered decades together. I saw Robert Vance toasting with the police chief. I saw my world, the world I had built from the ashes, thriving around me. As the night wound down, the crowd began to thin. The music slowed to a gentle jazz melody. The adrenaline that had sustained me was fading, replaced by a warm, heavy exhaustion. Julian led me off the dance floor, toward the balcony that overlooked the city. The rain had stopped. The New York skyline glittered like a jewelry box spilled onto black velvet. The air was crisp and cold, cleansing. I leaned against the stone railing, looking out at the lights. I thought about the girl on the stairs. I thought about the pain, the blood, the betrayal. I sent a silent thought back to her. Across time. "It is over. You can rest now." Julian stood behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. I didn't answer immediately. I moved my hand down. I placed it flat against my stomach. The dress was structured, hiding the tiny, secret curve that was just beginning to form. Nobody knew. Not the guests, not Elias, not even the press that was undoubtedly already printing the headlines about the arrest. I was 8 weeks along, 5 years ago. They had tried to kill the life inside me to secure a fortune. They had treated a child like a financial obstacle. They had said, "Get rid of it." I pressed my hand firmer against my belly. I felt the warmth of my own skin, the steady rhythm of my pulse. "I am thinking about the future," I whispered. I turned in Julian's arms. I took his hand and placed it over mine, right over the spot where our child was growing. He frowned slightly, confused for a microsecond. Then, his eyes widened. He froze. He looked at my face, searching for confirmation. "Gloria?" he breathed. "Are you?" I nodded. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were happy tears. "We won, Julian," I said. "We really won. The trust fund is safe. The company is safe. And this time," I looked down at our joined hands resting on my stomach. "This time, nobody is going to hurt us," I whispered. "I will protect this baby with everything I have. I will burn the world down again if I have to, but they will never touch us." Julian pulled me into him. Burying his face in my neck, I could feel him shaking with emotion. "A family," he whispered. "A real family." "Yes," I said, looking out at the city one last time. "A family." The past was a closed door. The future was an open sky, and I was finally, truly, ready to fly. The screen fades to black. Thank you so much for listening to Gloria's story of survival and justice. It has been a wild ride from that staircase in Chicago to the ballroom in New York, and I am so glad you were here to witness the takedown. Where are you listening to this story from right now? Are you at home, on your commute, or maybe hiding in the break room at work? Let me know in the comments below. I love seeing where our community is from. If you enjoyed seeing karma served cold, please make sure to subscribe to BitterSweet Drama Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.